Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are learning the differences between gouache paint and watercolor. They are very similar mediums, but on the paper when you're painting, you realize that they're actually really different. So I took this photo from 2017 and I tried to paint it, one with watercolor and one with gouache. If you would like to support me as an artist, please click on the like button or subscribe button. Watercolor, gouache. Let's paint. First, I would like to show you my supplies. Here on the right, I have my gouache set from Marte. My French is terrible, so please don't judge me. Let's have a closer look at one of them. They're in these little tubes and I have all the colors I need in set of 24. On the left, I have my Kuretake Gansai Tambi set of 36. I also have my sketch ready for both. As you can see, I'm using separate palettes for each of them. Let's get it started. Now let's try wet on wet method on both. If you don't know what it is basically applying wet paint on a pre-wetted surface. It creates wonderful results in watercolor. But let's see what happens with gouache paint. Even though I wetted the paper, the gouache paint doesn't spread at all. It's pretty thick and viscous. Even though I mix it with water, this is the result. This also causes my brush strokes to show. I hope these strokes will disappear when it dries. You know how in watercolor, if you want to get a lighter shade of your color, you mix with water? Well, that doesn't work with gouache. Look how dark it looks, even though I mixed it with water. You have two options to make gouache lighter. One, add white gouache in the mix, or just like me, spread it to a wider area. When it comes to mixing, they both mix well. For the bricks on the wall, I mixed different colors such as brown, yellow, ochre, and red, and both of them gave really good results. One thing for sure we realized while doing the bricks is that gouache is more opaque, meaning it's not transparent at all. As far as the brush control is concerned, for the small areas with your small size brush, you have the same amount of control for both watercolor and gouache. They are both easy to apply on paper. In watercolor, the best way to fix mistakes is to pick the paint or excessive water up by applying pressure with your tissue. But you have to do this while your paint is wet. Then you can go over it with fresh paint. But this doesn't work with gouache, unfortunately, so be aware. Gouache has really bright colors in comparison to my watercolor set, and mind you, I love this Kuretake watercolor set because they have brightest colors. This gouache set is something else. Fine details are easy with both, even slightly easier with gouache as it is thicker. Here you see me working on the door details with my watercolor. Transparency is important for professional watercolor artists because we work with layering. That is the way to give more depth to your painting. But with gouache, it is impossible to layer because it is not transparent at all. Definitely, it will be harder to give depth to my gouache painting. When it comes to white paint, gouache is the winner. Its opaqueness helps us a lot. You can paint white on another color and it still looks perfectly white. Watercolor white would look like a transparent layer instead. As we said before, in watercolor, we pick up the paint to fix things. With gouache, painting over the mistake seems like the best solution. Just like I'm doing here. Let me show you how picking it up with tissue doesn't work with gouache. See? I would like to show you an interesting method to give a nice different pattern to your paintings. First, I painted the tree trunk with yellow ochre and dried it with my blow dryer. Then I added the dark brown layer with a damp brush. Not damp. As a final step, I added this folded stretch film and pressed on it. Once it dries, you can remove it and you will see this gorgeous pattern. For some reason, it didn't work this well with gouache. Such a bummer. While I was painting the flowers with bright green, yellow, and red, I realized gouache felt like acrylic on the paper. It gives a little bit of fine art quality to your work. Speaking of acrylic, as you know, it is known for its quick drying times. But honestly, I think watercolor and gouache have very similar drying periods. Frankly though, I kept using my blow dryer, so that might be the reason I didn't notice the difference. I didn't like the sky color here, so I added a different color on the top. The lower layer didn't even show. This is something you can't do with watercolor. Now let's add the last touches with gouache on the door and in the flowers. I also erased those whites on the cobblestones, as you realized, and I replaced them with darker gray cobblestones instead. I thought it looked way better like this. Let's do the last touches with watercolor as well. I think the roof looked way better in my watercolor painting than the gouache one. Now let's do our final comparison. So let's see the results. I think they both look beautiful, but there were some differences. Let's look. So watercolor was very good at transparency and it was easy to layer. For fixing, I think the best way is to pick up the paint with tissue. Wet on wet method really works great on watercolor, and the stretch film method that we applied on the tree trunk worked much better with watercolor. Then what happens if we look at gouache instead? For gouache paint, it had really bright colors. The white color is so opaque that you can actually use it in your watercolor paintings to do snow or stars or anything else that you paint with white. To lighten up, it's not adding water, the solution is adding white color instead. Because of its viscous structure, it acts like acrylic, and in order to fix the mistakes, you need to cover them, not pick up with a tissue. If you would like the real-time narrated tutorial of this painting, it is available on my Patreon, patreon.com/Ece Gurler. Also, for some art tips and techniques, don't forget to visit my blog on ecegurler.com. See you in my next video. Bye! Thanks for watching my video. If you like my videos, please don't forget to subscribe. And for my real-time narrated tutorials, visit my Patreon, patreon.com/Ece Gurler. Stay with art and love.